doesn't care.
Sure.
Okay. And I have kept that because I knew that question will come. Right. So I've already shown you one demo, which is like the URL is getting hit. And then basically you are getting back the response, right, which I formatted and basically showed you just now, right? So same screenshot I put, right? So this brings us to the core question, right? So what I showed you just now is basically what we call as an API, right? In a website or app context, this is what an API means, right? So why is it important to learn about APIs? Because basically these are fundamental building blocks of how software is built, right? Be it an app, be it a website, right? Eventually all the data is coming through APIs, right? So without the APIs, without this foundational plumbing, nothing can work, right? So it's really, really important to understand how APIs work. And APIs have a much larger definition also, but because today the scope of the discussion is a website and apps, I will be covering APIs that specifically cover websites and apps, right? There is another definition of APIs in the like this is not really a definition, but this is basically an interpretation of APIs in the context of, let's say, installed software, right? So for example, if something is happening over the internet, then the narrow definition of API is that you are basically sending data over internet. You are requesting a URL or link over internet and you are getting back data. But API in general means application programming interface, which means that this is a way of building software. So basically like user interface, right? Something is called user interface. What does user interface do? User interface allows you to interact with some screens, right? Physical or digital screens. Similarly, application programming interface basically allows you to interact with other software, right? If you want to use some other software's capabilities to build your own software, then you use that software's application programming interface. That interface you can use to basically interact with that software, get that information and use it for yourself. This is exactly what we did, right? We are hitting empty flight engine, which is like some piece of software that is able to return me airport codes. And using those airport codes, I'm able to build my own piece of software, which is my own website, my own app, right? So application programming interface is a way to interact with another software whose power you want to use, and then basically get that functionality and then use it in your software. That is what an application programming interface is, right? And we'll see why APIs, like what happened in the past, right? Why did we go down the path of APIs? So the first version of internet, right, when internet started late 90s, right, basically the websites were only static websites, right? There was nothing funky happening, right? So for example, this is a real website. I actually picked it up. I actually went out there and searched for what are some of the oldest websites that are still live. So it turned out that 96 US presidential elections, I think the president and the vice president, Dole and Kemp, they basically ran for the US presidential elections. And this website is still live if you go to dolekemp96.org. But if you look at this website is always the same, right? This website does not change, right? So for example, in the case of Make My Trip flight website, when you go and search Delhi, Bangalore, you get a different result. When you search Bombay, Hyderabad, you get a different result. But this website is always the same, very static, only link based. Every time you go to this website, it is the same. You click on a link, it is the same. And the only action you can do on this website is clicking links. There is nothing happening. It's not like you are hovering on some icon and then basically something is popping up, right? Or there is basically a button that you can click, right? It is just plain simple links, right? So this is the first version of internet, right? Static websites. Then came interactive websites. Interactive websites means that the content is always the same, but then there is some interactivity happening. So for example, in this particular case, this is again a restaurant website, lazybeersf.com. So a restaurant website does not need to have dynamic data, right? Menus ka fixed hai. They have uploaded the menu, right? There is a tasting menu or there's a full-blown menu. There are maybe some images. The only thing they have is some interactivity going on, right? So basically there is, let's say, these three bars on top, right, which is the hamburger menu that all of you guys know, right? So if you click on this, it will throw up a menu option key. Here are those 5 things that you can basically look at, right? Or maybe there is some button below, right? So maybe there is a button on the side which is like chat with us, right? So again, So this is interactivity, right? So maybe if you click on this, it opens up a query form and you can say, yeah, book me a reservation, right? So nothing fancy dynamic is happening. It is more interactive than dynamic, right? And obviously the final step is basically completely dynamic websites. All websites today or all apps today are dynamic, right? So Make My Trip, housing, booking, Yelp, Flipkart, Amazon, right? Everything is dynamic. Why do I say they are dynamic and not interactive? Because the state of the world is changing, right? So for example, if you go to, let's say, Zomato, right? Someone and you went to a certain sort of restaurant's page, right? Someone has written a review yesterday, right? That review will now start coming up. 5 days later, two more reviews got added, two more reviews now start coming up, right? So those, there the content itself is dynamic, right? So there are these three phases, right? Static websites, interactive websites, and dynamic websites. So now we will cover two different aspects of APIs that basically help us. So you can imagine static website, there is no fancy API happening, right? Because it is all linked, just HTML, click on a link, go to another link, click on a link, go to another link. But if you want to do something fancy, like, okay, you hover on a certain icon and something pops up, right? Or you click on a certain button and some menu comes up, right? So for that, you need some kind of programming thing happening behind the scenes, right? So that is where the first version of the APIs started coming in, right? And then when the dynamic stuff came in, right? Exactly the example that I showed you just now with Make My Trip, then obviously, then you start getting more full-blown APIs, right? Another version of APIs where you basically hit those APIs and then you start getting data from them, right? So let's cover the interactive first, right? So how does interactivity work on websites, right? So like I said, all kinds of fancies, anytime you have a state change, right, which responds to users input, whether that's input coming from some form, right, where you type Bangalore, Delhi, or you're basically hovering on something, there has to be something happening programmatically that is manipulating the content, right? So the first version, the interactivity, the way it gets powered is what is known as a DOM API, a document object model API, right? I'll show you some examples, right? So basically, web pages is eventually HTML, which is the structure of the document, and CSS. To be able to manipulate websites, web pages programmatically, browsers have what is known as a DOM API. This is the most fundamental web API, right? Without this, websites cannot be interactive. What is document object model? It basically represents the structure of the document, right? So there is some HTML, but usi HTML ko, if I have to manipulate it programmatically, then the browser supports an API that allows you to do it. So let's see some example without sort of talking more. Let me give you a simple example. Because otherwise it will probably not help. So this is what we'll do. So let's go back, reload this page. So now, पिछली बार when I was doing the demo, I showed you the network tab. This time, what I'm showing you is basically the console tab. The console tab in developer tools allows you to write code within the browser, right? I'm just clearing this again. So I'll show you a few examples, right? So let's say I'm not expecting you to know how to write all of this thing, but I'm just showing you a few examples. So basically, all of the browsers support what is known as the DOM API, right? So DOM is document object model. The top level of that is basically a document. So I started writing document here. As soon as I wrote document, you can see on the left side, all of it started getting highlighted, right? Why? Because document represents the entire page, right? If the API basically says that by document, you can refer to the entire page, what the browser is trying to show you is basically highlighting the entire page and saying that, okay, this entire thing is document, right? So that is what it is, right? So now, again, I'll just show you few things. So you can see, I want to show you simple examples so that you are able to understand it. So you can see that every website has a lot of images. For example, this Make My Trip icon, this phone icon, this MyBiz icon, etc., etc. There are images here also where to go, trip money. Then there are images here on offers, etc. Right? So the way any image is represented in HTML, I'll just show you quickly. So I did an inspect. One second. So what I did was I went to this make matter icon. I clicked and I basically right click and said inspect. As soon as I inspected, this basically showed me where this HTML, this particular specific component was within the HTML, right? So it got highlighted. You can see that this is basically an image highlighted by this img. So basically any image on any web page is basically an image tag, img tag, right? So again, going back to console. So if I have to, let's say, grab all images, right? So I say document dot get me all elements, right? So get me all elements, and get me all elements by tag name, right? And in tag name, I say image. So ideally, the browser should be able to get me all images, right? And I will just store it in some variable, right? So let me, the variable name is image list. Okay. So I basically grab, what I'm trying to do is grab all images from this HTML by saying document.get elements by tag name image, give me all the images, and I'm storing it in image list, right? Now, if I type image list, when I type document, now if I type image list, it is showing me all the different images out there on the page, right? I can expand this list. It's a list. You can see there are lots of images. So when I clicked on this one, it is highlighting this image. When I clicked on this one, it will highlight another image. See, it is already highlighting some image, another image within, it actually took me there. You can see if I tap on this one, this image is getting highlighted, which is like the arrow next to the explore more, right? If I go to, let's say, scrolling further, if I go to 9, it is telling me that the Vistara flight icon is basically this image. Okay. So let's see. So because DOM allows me the power to basically manipulate things, right? So what I'm going to do is write more code. So let me just again clear it. So now I know that I already have all the images in my image list, and I know my 9th image is basically the Vistara flight, right? So I took that 9th image, right? And what I'm doing is right now it is a Vistara flight icon. What I'm going to do is programmatically, dynamically manipulate it to, so I'm changing the source, and let's say, just for lack of a better sort of, just for having fun, let's change the Vistara icon to, let's say, a Indigo icon, right? So what I've done is I've already downloaded an Indigo icon, not really downloaded, but basically I have the link to an Indigo icon. So I'm just going to go and pick it. So this is the Indigo logo, you can see, right? So is URL pe Indigo logo mera pada hua hai, right? So I already have it there. I'll go back to console and I will set the source. Ki boss, change the source to the Indigo icon that is there. And as soon as I did it, you can see programmatically, dynamically, the website changed, it became Indigo, right? So this is document object model API, right? The reason why I'm teaching you document object model API is because this allows interactivity. This allows you to manipulate content within your web page, right? So the web page came and was loaded in my browser. Now within my browser, I can run code, which is the document object model API, the DOM API, to basically manipulate my website on the fly. This is what exactly happens behind the scenes when you see things popping up, when you hover, or when you click on a button, the drop down drops down, right? So all of those things are happening because the DOM API is able to power. Questions, doubts, confusion? Did you get it?
So this will see, the coding part was a bouncer though, but then this will just happen within our web page, or the one thing which you did, this will happen within our web page or across the website?
This thing happened within the context of my web page. This is only happening within my browser because I have written this code locally. I have not put it on, I have
the
not
main
deployed it.
Right.
Yeah. So this is happening locally, but I did not do anything fancy. Any website is a bunch of tags, right? Any image on a website is basically an image tag, which was evident from the IMG, right? Which I showed you earlier. Right. So all I did was I said to my browser, give me the document. So document is the entire website. Out of this, give me all the elements all the elements from that website that have tag name image. And obviously the tag name image is for images, right? And then basically this I stored in something called image list, right? All I did was ye mujhe do and assign it to image list. So I put it in image list. Then we inspected image list. I found out that the 9th image was this Vistara thing. And in that, what I did was I changed the source. So source is basically how you set the source of an image, right? So in the source, instead of whatever content that the website has sent me, instead of that, I changed it to the Indigo logo, right? So as soon as I changed it to the Indigo logo, hit enter, the Indigo logo came up, right? So this, what I'm trying to show you is basically the DOM API allows you to programmatically manipulate websites. So this is one API, so to speak.
So instead of image, if I write down, if I change the tag to text, so the written content is that text or what?
You can do stuff like that also. So let me show you another example. So now let me show you another example. So this CTA is there. This is the text button. Okay. I showed you just one image example. Let me show you a text example. So let's say I want to change this one, right? So what I'm going to do is, again, I will have a look ki exactly what is this button, right? So it tells me that this is basically a button. This is an anchor tag. Anchor tag is basically nothing but a link, and it has certain classes, primary, button, phone, 24, etc. And then it says search, right? So what I'm going to do is, let me just copy it, right? So let me just copy this element. I'll just put it someplace. So I know that this button has a specific class, and these classes are primary button, lato, bold, widget, search button. So ये widget search button seems like a very specific class name. तो अब मैं वापस से जा रहा हूँ console में, and again I'm doing the same thing, right? So I want to get access to that specific button, right? So what I will do is var button list equals, this time instead of saying get element by tag, I'm saying get elements by class name. Why am I saying class name? Because here the class is set to something, right? And ये widget search button इसका नाम है, इसके class का नाम है. तो अब मैं इसमें widget search button डाल दूंगा. ठीक है, I'll put the widget search button, right? Now the way the code works is basically there could be multiple such buttons with this class name. So let's see what happens, right? So I did that. So I assigned it to button list. अब मैं button list को अगर जाके मैं करूँ, inspect करूँ, so I know I have something. I only have one item in that, and I can see it is the search button, right? So now I will refer that specific item. ठीक है. अब मुझे करना है इसका text change करना है, like exactly what you said, right? So instead of search, let's say I change it to ठीक है, change हो गया, right? So what I'm trying to basically show you is that anything that is interactive, right? And there are two parts to it, right? First part is interactivity, and the second part is dynamicity. The interactivity is powered by the DOM API. The examples that I'm trying to show you, basically there are things that can run within your browser, and you can basically define them on certain user action, right? That okay, when the user hovers on a certain button, change the color to red, right? And that thing basically is happening behind the scenes like this, exactly what I'm trying to show you. Like you basically change the image, you change the color, right? So what is happening behind the scenes is some code is running within the browser, which is basically changing it. And that is what does the interactivity, right? Or click on something and should expand, right? So all of those things are basically interactivity, right? So behind the scenes, what is happening? The DOM API is basically being the DOM API is basically powering this, right? So the reason why I covered the DOM API is because if you will hear your developers use the DOM API word so much that you will wonder what is DOM API, which is why I wanted to make this distinction very clear that interactivity, DOM, dynamicity, URLs that are returning you data, and both are APIs. APIs, like I said, is a generic concept. It is application programming interface. Anything to do with programmatic manipulation, the word API will come in. But in the context of a browser, it is a browser API, and it is the most popular browser API, which is the DOM API. So let's.
I have one question.
Yeah.
So like, what is the difference between a normal API and a REST API?
Sorry, Tinker, can you just come a little closer to your mic because your voice is bit.
Yes, yes. So
Yeah.
I was saying that, what is the difference between a normal API and a REST API?
What is the difference between a normal API and a REST API? Great question. So API is basically, like I said, anything that gives you programmatic manipulation
Response.
capabilities, right? Programmatic data. But the same API can be written in 2 or 3 different ways, right? So depending on what architecture you follow, one of the ways in the older days when I used to be a developer, the only way to basically write APIs was what was known as a SOAP way of writing things, which was simple object access protocol, if I remember it correctly, right? Simple object access protocol. So back in the days, the only way to write APIs was the SOAP way of writing it. Then obviously in the tech world, things keep evolving, right? You keep on improving stuff, right? So later on, what happened was that people figured out that the SOAP way of doing things is not very good and not very efficient, because the data payload is very heavy, because it is all the data basically comes in XML format. Now I'm going in areas that I don't want to talk about, but basically the SOAP was the older way of doing things. Then people improved it and they said that no, let's not do the SOAP way of doing things. Let's write APIs in a different way, and let's call this new way of writing APIs REST. REST of full form है representational state transfer. Basically, what happens is in that particular case, everything is treated as a resource, right? So basically, you hit a resource, you get back all the content for that particular resource, right? So पहले SOAP आया, मतलब in simple terms, what I'm trying to tell you is सबसे पहले SOAP आया. SOAP was the de facto standard of writing APIs, but API होती वही थी. You basically hit something, you get back the data, right? Just that the way you have built it behind the scenes is the SOAP way of doing things. Then people said, no, this is not great. The data, especially in that case, the data did not used to come in the format that I showed you just now, which is a sum key and colon and value. It used to come as XML. Then they said XML is too heavy, way too much metadata. And then the way of writing SOAP APIs was not the greatest and convenient for the developers. So they improved it and they said, let's do it the REST way. So REST is another way of basically building APIs. In this particular case, they changed the data interchange format to basically JSON, which is basically key value pairs, exactly what I showed you just now, right? So basically, what is it? It is saying data and data ke andar IITA Bangalore, right? So the key is IITA and the value is Bangalore. The icon, the key name is icon and the value is this image URL. The key name is city name and the value is Bengaluru, right? So they moved from XML to basically what we call as JSON. Then they said REST is great, and this is actually today the de facto standard, but they have done further improvements, and they're saying that okay, REST is great, but in certain cases the REST does not work that well. So now we have another way of writing APIs, which is known as GraphQL. And honestly, even I don't know how GraphQL works. I have not gone that deep. But GraphQL is another way of writing APIs, and the way name suggests, it is a good way of writing APIs when it is a data intensive, very data intensive behind the scenes, right? So for writing very data intensive APIs, then you basically resort to Graph, right? So things keep improving, and there are different architectural patterns in which you build it behind the scenes. So basically, what I'm talking about is that the MMT flight engine might be written in REST, might be written in SOAP, might be written in GraphQL. But again, the app or the website does not care. They don't care whether it has been written in SOAP, whether it has been written in REST, whether it has been written in GraphQL. All they care about is, boss, I asked you for data, please give me that data. Clear?
Yeah, so like as well as the PM role into a PM role.
Sorry, Pinker, you have to come closer to your mic because your voice always breaks a lot. Yeah.
Now it's audible.
Yeah, better.
Yeah, so I was asking so as a PM role, do we need to take care of the backend data also?
No. You don't really need to know how the API architectural pattern is built, but what you do need to know is in what cases, what request will go and what response will come back, right? Because ultimately that request and response depends on the actual user use case.
Okay,
Right?
got it.
If you're covering the different use cases and your developer has given you an API format which tells you that yes, all your use cases are covered, you are fine. You don't really need to care about behind the scenes whether they have used SOAP, whether they have used REST, whether they have used GraphQL. That is something that you don't need to care about.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay. So let's talk about other web APIs, right? So the browser is becoming more and more powerful behind with time, right? And so they now support a lot of other APIs. DOM was the first foundational sort of web API that was available in the browsers. But as you can see, as more devices, so back then, let's say mobile phones, when smartphones were not there, so you did not need a screen orientation API, right? With now devices coming and portrait landscape, the browsers have started supporting screen orientation API. Then they now have sensor APIs because your phone device has a lot of sensors, right? There's a storage API. Bluetooth came in as a data interchange protocol, and so the browser started supporting Bluetooth API, right? So as browsers have become more and more capable, new and new programmatic APIs are coming in, right? And these are all supported by the browser. Hence, these are called web APIs. Typically written in JavaScript. So the language I used here to basically show you a few examples within the browser is all JavaScript code, but it could be written in something else also. There are ways to basically write it in some other language, but typically like you use like 99.99% of the cases you use JavaScript. So if the code example basically went like a bouncer, basically you need to spend some time understanding what JavaScript is, and then all of this will become even more clear to you, right? So obviously